and UPLAN on this philanthropic self-reflection tool journey. We're super excited, and I'll be helping with some of the moderating today. So with that, I'll pass it off to our fearless leaders, Mike and Rose, to kick us off and get us started this morning.
Sure. Thank you so much, Katie.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us today. We are so excited to share this innovative journey with you.
And we're just gonna jump right in today. So I'm Mike White with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Healthy Children and Families team. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Funders Group on Parent Organizing, Family Engagement, and Leadership Development, which we just call the Funders Group. And yes, one of our action items for the year is to shorten that name a little bit, I think. And I'm thrilled to be up here virtually with Rose in front of you to really kick off this really exciting opportunity. I'm going to start by giving some gratitude for some folks, run us through our agenda and some norms, and then I'm going to pass it over to Rose, who is going to lead us into our really exciting icebreaker, which I think we're all going to have get a real kick out of. So starting with some gratitude, this event, the learning community that's going to come out of it, none of this would have been possible without the amazing and brilliant work of Viva Social Impact Partners, particularly Iris Alent and Katie Nagy, who have been wonderful at providing so much backbone support to the Funders Group. Our incredible UPLAN, United Parent Leaders Action Network team, Rose, Sarah, Muna, Carolyn, Aaron, and my Funders Group colleagues, Margarita Alvarez, Anita Black, and my co-chair Malia Ramler, who have been really instrumental in planning this event. This is a huge, exciting opportunity, and we really feel like it could change the way philanthropy operates and the way that we interact with parents and really shift some power dynamics. So let's get started with just running quickly through the agenda. Katie, could you switch the slide for me? Cool. So we're going to start out today, as I mentioned, with a quick icebreaker in some small groups that Rose is going to introduce to really get us thinking. And then we'll hear a little bit about how this opportunity really came together, our partnership between the United Parent Leaders Action Network and our Funders Group. Then we're really going to jump straight into describing the tool itself and walk you through what we envision our learning community is really going to look like before we get into some question and answers and some next steps and ultimately how to join this really exciting opportunity. So a few norms that we have, if you could pop over to, oh, we're already there. A few norms for us today. Just please make sure that you stay on mute throughout the conversation. Even, you know, a year into the pandemic, we still hear people at the doctor's office or something every once in a while. Make sure to put any questions that you have in the chat box. Sarah is going to be absolutely wonderful at volunteering to help us man the Q&A section later and make sure that all of those questions get included. And finally, the event is being recorded, so if for whatever reason you want to get a snack or get up and you want to turn off your camera, feel free to do so. So I think that's about it, and now I'm so excited to turn it over to Rose.
Thank you so much, Mike. So partnership can be productive, but it can also be fun. So let's have a little fun right now. So we're going to be breaking folks into groups. And as you go into those groups, I want you to think about this. If you could only keep 2 apps on your phone, what would those 2 apps be? Only 2, only 2. And then why? But here's the catch. You can only describe the why with up to 5 words. So you can't go over 5 words. So what are the 2 apps you would keep out of all the important apps that we have on our phones? And 5 words to tell us why. And then we're going to have folks in the group to kind of capture which apps were the norms or the favorites in the group. So as you guys are breaking out into groups, I want you to be thinking about this. And I know it's kind of hard and you want to say 3, 4, or 5, but you only get 2.
All right, and Iris, are you ready to break us out? Okay, let's do it.
Everyone's back. Really quickly, let's debrief. Were there any common themes, apps that seem to stick out that more people picked together?
My group had some, Rose. The big one for us, folks wanted to stay connected to their families, whether it was through FaceTime or text or WhatsApp, connecting to folks, whether they're all the way in Japan or whatever, or across the country or down the street, being able to be in touch with folks. And then the photo apps, whether it's Instagram or just the regular one, you know, I think, I don't remember the last time anyone was carrying around an actual camera. I know it's certainly been a long time for me. So being able to snap pictures is definitely important and share them.
Okay, any other ones real quick before we move on? We might not be able to get to every group.
Other than all the ones that Mike said, and then Google and the calendar. I got a lot of organized people in my breakout room.
Awesome. I want to encourage you guys to keep it going in the chat. If any things were lifted up in your group that we didn't mention so far, keep talking to us in the chat, but we want to respect everyone's time and get through this. So I'm going to hand it off to the next group. Thank you all so much. I hope you had fun.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you, Mike. So next up, we have Margarita and Muna to talk us through the partnership journey for UPLAN and Funders Group.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. My name is Margarita Alvarez, and I work with the William Casper Graustein Memorial Fund in Hamden, Connecticut. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the partnership that we created during the Funders Group. So I have been part of the Funders Group since 2019, and I am part of the advisory committee. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Katie. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we did, what we have done, what we plan to do. So in 2019, we came together. It was in Seattle. In the Funders Group, we were thinking about ways to partner with parents in an equitable way. And we wanted to make sure that we were including parents even at the beginning of thinking how to partner with parents. So during that meeting, we were like, how can we begin to have conversations with parents here at the beginning? So in 2020, we decided to partner with UPLAN, a national group that Muna is going to talk to you a little bit more about. And they became a consultant to the Funders Group. And UPLAN brought in their parent leaders. We began to build a relationship with the parent leaders and the advisory committee. Through that relationship, we built a strong partnership, and UPLAN decided to conduct interviews to get some information about the best practices that have worked or haven't worked. So UPLAN interviewed a few parent leaders from across the country, and then UPLAN also interviewed funders. The parents themselves created the interviews, the questions, collected the data, and the research findings were incorporated into a self-reflection tool that was created in 2020 by the group. Now, UPLAN and the Funders Group drafted this self-reflection tool, and we want to emphasize that this is just a draft, and this is an opportunity for us to come together and learn and create even a better tool. So what we're going to be doing is also creating a community, like a community of learning community, where we're going to hopefully, the team will talk to you more about that, but where we can create a space where we're learning together, partnering together, and hopefully creating solutions. I'm going to let Muna talk a little bit more about UPLAN and from her point of view, but I do want to emphasize that it was very important for us to bring parents along this entire journey from the beginning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Muna Hussein. I am with Supporting Partnership in Education and Beyond. We are one of the organizations in UPLAN. And for the last 2 years, I got the opportunity and fortunate to work with this amazing group and this really important work. If I talk about, if I talk about a little bit about UPLAN, as you might all know, UPLAN is a national organization, more than 30 organizations all around this country. And when we decided to interview, we reached all our organizations, and 11 organizations was interviewed. And what we learned from those organizations, from California to all the way to Mississippi, those organizations start with one or maybe a group of people who find the need for their community, whether it's education, justice, health, basic needs, a group of people who are love and have a compassion for the work they do for the community, and they must many times we finding they were working without any funding, without any support for many years in some cases. And those organizations were willing to sit with us and tell us what they would like, what their struggle is, what is those foundations, how important they could play in their support, not only a financial support, but also to understand their cultures, to understand their community, to understand this style of their work, to relate to those communities. So when we collected that interviews, and it was a lot of crying to me, because I don't have a lot of knowledge of this country, and I would be fool to say that. We decided also it will be equally fair to reach the funders and also learn from them and hear from them. And we find 10 wonderful funders groups who also decided, yes, we're gonna sit, we're gonna talk with you and kind of make the input of also their side, because we have to balance both the sides if we have in a relationship. And what we find out is equally all of them were willing for the change, or either start the change. They're willing to listen and hear those from those organizations. And many times when we raise questions and kind of outrage, they were not saying, yeah, that's the way it is. They were willing to listen, and they were understanding the struggle. But there is a reality here, and there is a system who many years, in some cases 100 years, was set up. So how can we look that system together, talk about it, keep what's working for us, and also change what's not working in a respect and relationship ways. And that's when we come up with the self-reflection tool. And if you notice, and I'm hoping you will all not only look, but study and hear the voices of those organizations, those community-led organizations, what their needs are, what their concerns are. It is absolutely a self-reflection tool, and we are hoping you will be part of this journey, which is not just one thing, and just we are moving from it, but it's going to be continuously a relationship going.
Thank you, Muna. Do you mind, Katie, going to the next slide, and then I can just kind of give you the importance of why, as a funder, we should be collaborating with parent funders. And one of our strong values and beliefs is that those closest to the issues should be at the table developing the solutions. So, and we also want to find ways that funders could identify and reach grassroots organizations. We also want to be able to create a more equitable organizational practice and authentic relationship with communities, and try to avoid the unintended impact on parent groups and their important work. Now, that just gives you a little bit of the why the funders group. I'm going to pass it over to the rest of the group to talk to you a little bit more about the tool.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Muna.
So, go ahead. As long as we're done here, maybe the next group is going to explain better in detail. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Muna, and thank you, Margarita. As Muna and I were both saying at the same time, we'll pass it off to Carolyn and Iris to talk a little bit more about the tool itself.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. My name is Iris Alent. I'm a consultant with Viva Social Impact Partners and providing backbone and strategic support to the Funders Group, and have been working in collaboration with the Funders Group and UPLAN over the past year on developing this tool, and really excited to be here and share with you more about this important work.
Thanks, Iris. And I'm Carolyn Lee Davis, and I'm part of the National Parent Leadership Institute and a part of UPLAN. And with Iris and everybody else who's presenting here today, have gotten to be a part of this work over the last year or so, and grateful for the chance to be talking with more folks about it today. So Iris and I are going to give you a little bit of an overview of the tool and walk through a little bit how it works. And just to back up for a second and to build on what Muna and Margarita were sharing, the creation of this tool really started with a review of the landscape. And there were a number of great resources out there, but we didn't find a tool that was designed specifically for philanthropy. And so this tool really spans from logistics to internal decision making to capacity building and different levels of philanthropic practice. And where we are in the practice right now is, so we've gone through this creation, and with the interviews that Muna and Margarita were describing, brought in the learnings from those to create this tool and have what we think is a pretty good draft. And now we're in the midst of wanting to pilot it, and that's what we wanted to talk with all of you about. Really, this is a very living, breathing tool, and want the chance to put it into action to see how it works for funders back within their home organizations and see what works and where change might be needed to have it work better for funders as they continue in this work. And I would say it's very much intended to meet folks where they are. So there's, we know that a number of you are already involved in this work. There's a number of different ways to enter into it. And it's really about continuing growth for all of us and meeting each of us where we are versus looking for perfection or coming in with things already figured out and in a great place. And I'll hand it back to you, Iris.
Awesome. Next slide, Katie. So one of the things that I wanted to mention about the contents of this tool, we did include a definition of parents in the tool. And so we recognize that raising a child may take many different forms. And so throughout the tool and throughout this conversation today, I want to echo that the term for parent is really meant to be inclusive of all sorts of parents, whether that be adopted parents, foster parents, family members, any legal guardian or caretaker that's involved in raising a child. And what's exciting about this tool is that it really aims to connect those dots between advancing racial equity and parent partnership, and to make those connections through changes in philanthropic practice. So for each of the domains in the tool, you'll find an explanation of what that domain is really focused on. And then what is the goal that funders can be striving towards through practice change in that particular domain. Then there's a rubric that really outlines elements of funder practice for self-reflection so that funders can map where they are and where they want to be along that continuum of partnership. And really, this isn't a rating or scoring tool. It's supposed to meet you where you are and really encourage growth and honest conversation. As was mentioned, the tool is really based on those lived experiences of the funders and parents that were part of those interviews. And so throughout the tool in each domain, you'll find stories and quotes that really exemplify the importance of implementing those practice elements, as well as the impact that they can have on the work. And then finally, this tool was designed to be used in conversation with parents. So you'll find at the end, there's questions for self-reflection for both your internal teams, as well as in honest and authentic dialogue with parent leaders. So we really encourage funders to bring in their parent grantee partners, either those parents that they're working with or maybe not yet working with, and really consulting them and of course compensating them for that consultation and getting that technical assistance to support implementing these practices within the foundation. Next slide. And this is just an example of how the rubric portion of the tool is laid out. Again, really allowing you to examine where you fall on the continuum of parent partnership and then where you want to work towards. Next slide. So the 4 domains of philanthropic practice that this tool is built around are learning and innovation, internal organizational practice, influence, and catalyzing impact. And we'll get into all of these right now. So the first one, next slide, thank you, Katie, is learning and innovation. So this particular domain is really focused on how a foundation is incorporating parent voice and expertise in foundation's learning activities and research processes, and making sure that all of those processes and learnings are both informed by and accessible to families. So from start to finish, parents are a part of the process. And so examples of some of the activities that are outlined in this particular domain include things like, are parents compensated adequately for lending their insights and their expertise in research, either that the foundation is conducting or is funding? And then things like, are they brought in to jointly write publications on research about families? And are they given the due credit for their contributions to the work? So those are just examples of some of the activities and practices that are outlined in the tool in this domain. And by making practice change in this particular area, philanthropy can really uplift the expertise of their grantee partners and essentially wield their influence to give credibility to parents for the valuable work that they are contributing to the field. Next slide. So this next domain is internal organizational practice, and really the focus of this particular domain is to center activities throughout a foundation to make sure that there's consistent and widespread culture that prioritizes and values parent partnership to advance the mission of a foundation. And so activities in this particular domain are things like prioritizing staff time and budgets internally at the foundation to building staff capacity to work with families and parents, having your board commit to having parent representation, and not just tokenized representation, but decision-making power. And so one way that practice change in this particular domain can have an impact is that, and this is something we heard in the interviews, is that whenever there is a change in program officers, there's consistency in how program officers are approaching the values of that partnership with the parent grantee partner, and those relationships aren't disrupted when there are kind of a changing of hands. So there's a lot of power in this particular domain as well. Next slide. I'll hand it over to you, Carolyn.
Thanks, Iris. So this domain, influence, is really about how funders have the opportunity to use their influence to amplify parent needs, experience, perspectives, and serve as that bridge between parent leaders and other stakeholders that they need to collaborate with. And so for this one, the tool really digs in and looks at how that financial capital and leadership that philanthropy has provides the opportunity for social capital to leverage and influence stakeholders. And so organizations, some of the elements that we look at in this one is considering and reflecting how a funder might champion the work of parent organizations, how you might showcase initiatives led by parent organizations, or even their advocacy agendas, and see how those might be aligned or lifted up in the community, as well as looking at how you might bring forth parent perspectives on different challenges that are being addressed in the community, and consider how you could introduce parent-centered grantees to other funders and partners to keep the work going and to maximize the impact of it. Next slide, please. And then the domain of catalyzing impact, this one is really in terms of how funders see parents and parent leaders as community experts. That's the hope, that funders are moving towards seeing parents and parent leaders as partners and for the expertise that they have on the community, and how that can both guide the internal work of impact-driven grant making and really start to view it as a fundamental part of doing work, seeing parents as your partners, and how that can be supported and resourced through grant making and investments. The elements of practice that the tool walks through for this one, some of those include things like, are you including parents in your review panel or your decision-making process? If you have a new grant opportunity, what are the ways that parents can help work with foundation staff to think about who gets funded, who's doing this work in the community, and who they'd like to see be supported? Seeking out ways to simplify and reduce paperwork and processes that might right now be limiting parent-led or other grassroots organizations from applying or ultimately being successful in getting funds? Are there ways to start to change some of those systems so that those doing the work have a more equitable way in through the door? Yeah, next slide, please. And I will hand off to Sarah and Anita.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you might be. Sarah and I are happy to walk you through this next group of slides. I'm Anita Black from the Greater Rochester Health Foundation. Sarah?
And hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Morrison from Choice for All and member of UPLAN.
Next slide, Katie.
Yeah. So we're going to just talk about learning community objectives. So the learning community objectives are as follows. Create a space for funders and parent organizations to build authentic relationships.
And we also want to create a space for facilitating reflection, because in order to make any kind of practice change, we know there needs to be opportunity for reflection so that we can center around racial equity and partnership with parent-led organizations.
And we want to pilot the Philanthropic self-reflection tool for equitable parent partnership and collect some really good feedback on the tool.
And then also to have fun. As I'm sure everyone on this call today can know, change can be challenging and hard and come with a lot of things to wrestle with, but we definitely want to bring a sense of joy into this work and the joy of change. Next slide.
So, right on this slide, we're going to be discussing what the community format will look like. So we're going to be initiating 4 meetings. The meeting format is as follows. We're going to have, there's going to be a meeting in May, July, September, and in November. The way we look at it, the timing of the meetings will be 2 to 4 hours per meeting. No less than 2 hours, no more than 4 hours. And the capacity now, if you see here, we want to make it equitable, as equitable and equal for both. So we have here funders 16 and parents 16, but no more than 2 individuals from each organization. So half the spots will be reserved for funders who are not members of the funders group advisory committee, trying to make it fair and open space for everyone to get a chance to be a part of it.
And as we're looking for lens and perspective across funders and parents, we wanted to give you a sense of the possible time commitments that you would have toward this learning collaborative. There'll need to be some time for completing each domain prior to the meeting for which that domain will be focused on, and that's probably 30 minutes to an hour. And yet there'll also be a need for a deeper dive with your internal team to discuss perhaps the specific domain track that you plan to focus on in your organizational work. So as you dive a little deeper, consider that there could be another 2 to 3 hours within your internal team. Also attendance at the 4 learning collaboratives that Sarah had shared with you, and 2 to 4 hours for that. There also may be some need for reflection and action in between meetings, much of that to be determined, but to anticipate that you're some sort of processing and activity in between meetings. And then most importantly, we want to keep hearing from you all along the way and receive feedback on this tool, as it is a live document, as we have offered back to you. And that self-reflection would probably be about 1 to 2 hours to receive your feedback. Next slide. So we wanted to give you kind of some learning community expectations, but also wanted to share that as we come together as a learning community, for those of you who express interest in doing that, we will also be working on some collective norms at that time. But overall, the expectation is that funders would complete all domains of the self-reflection tool prior to the start of the learning collaborative, including the scoring of each element and responding to the reflection questions. That all participants, both funders and parent leaders, commit to attending all 4 meetings and responding to the feedback surveys. And third, to commit to communicating respectfully and honestly and actively check in on our own power and privilege. Identify and communicate about discussion topics that might trigger discomfort, and spend some time in between meetings to complete the tool, engage in conversations with colleagues, with your internal teams, within your foundation, and certainly to be present. We really want this tool to be a supportive tool for the philanthropic sector in order to create an opportunity to really better partner with parents. We're trying to build equity and build, wield, and share power. So it will take us to a place where we'll need to be present. And then there'll be an opportunity to sign a document stating that we agree to meet all those expectations. Next slide.
Thank you, Anita. And going on, continuing for our parent leaders, we would really like you all to read through the self-reflection tool prior to the launch of the learning community. Very similar to what the funders will be doing. We're asking everyone to commit to attending all 4 meetings and to please give us your feedback. Be intentional about responding to the surveys. We put a lot of thought and effort and hard work on both sides. And we're really excited about this. Commit to communicating respectfully and honestly. Bring your true self when responding. Identify and communicate about discussion topics that trigger discomfort. It's like we always say, lean into the discomfort. Stay engaged with other funders and parent leaders in between meetings via an online website portal. Be present. We all know how to do that. Show up. And then sign a document stating that you agree to meet all expectations. We all worked really hard at this. We're very proud of the work that we put into with funders and parents together. We love the relationship that we've established, and we're just asking everyone to really put your all into it and just stay true to what we have brought in together in this tool. Next slide, please.
So for the first learning community meeting, there would be, as we've sort of outlined before, but just to give you a little additional expectation, a need to read through the complete self-reflection tool, individually complete domain 1, and then complete your assigned domain of the self-reflection tool with your internal team. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. Some options that we're just offering back is to disseminate the tool to your team to complete the rubric and then hold approximately hour meeting to discuss the results, or to hold a 2 to 3 hour team meeting collectively to work on it together.
And for our parent leaders also, again, read through the complete self-reflection tool and take some time to reflect on the goals before participating in the learning community. Again, we did a lot of work. We enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And it was some discomfort, but it was some good stuff. So enjoy it. And, we look forward to seeing where this goes. And we'll hand it back to you, Katie.
Great. Thank you, Sarah and Anita. So with that, we will pass it off back to Mike and Rose to lead us through some Q&A. And I know we've seen lots of questions pop up in the chat, so we can start getting to those now.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. And again, thank you everyone for taking your time out today to dive into what is just the beginning of what we hope to be an amazing journey toward real partnership and real success with policy and system change and all of the things that we all want to accomplish, but we're doing it together this time. And so I'm looking in the chat, and I want the rest of us to all feel free to chime in and answer these questions, but I'll just lift up one mic and then you can take it from there. There was a question that asked if each of the funders could invite a parent leader to join them in the learning community process. And any of you guys feel free to answer that.
So I think what we're hoping, and we would love it if a funder has a particular group in mind, or a parent group has a funder in mind that they would really want to sort of bring along to this. And certainly we would love to sort of make a mechanism so you can sort of mention who you would be maybe bringing along as a partner in the group. I think that's a fantastic suggestion. But other than that, you know, if folks don't, you know, when we send out, I think, a brief survey about interest, if folks don't mention a group, we'll largely be doing this first come, first serve, I think. But thank you. We would love to have sort of partner groups as part of this.
Thank you, Mike. I also see in the chat that there's an excellent question that is asking basically, what is the process beyond the learning community? Is there a plan for folks to be engaged? And I'm really excited, and I'll start by saying, and then other folks jump in, that this is just the beginning. And we're hoping that the learnings that we get from this initial or pilot, if you want to call it, learning community will inform us on how we can proceed. But we really want to have funders everywhere and parent-led groups everywhere working in partnership. So absolutely, we'll continue. Any of you guys want to chime in?
Rose, I was just going to say, I was going to ask Katie to put back up the slide that Anita and I did that talked about the 16 funders with the 16 parent leaders, because that seemed to come up a few times. It was asked to explain that in more detail. So basically, we didn't want to, when we were discussing this, and you guys can chime in, but I'm going to do my best at explaining it. When we were discussing, we didn't want it to be so broad that it was, we lost like the conversation piece of it all. So we wanted to make it a good conversation with a small group of people, that it was equal amount of funders with an equal amount of parents, but not the funders who were part of the planning process. Am I correct, guys? Because the funders who were part of the planning process, we already know, they already know what the intention is. So we wanted to bring in 16 new funders to be a part of it, along with 16 more parents. Is that correct? Not the one on the planning process? Correct me if I'm wrong, guys.
Up to 16 funders altogether, I think.
Altogether.
And 16 parents, yeah.
Right. So that way we could have some good conversation and just discussing everything that brought us to this space. Am I correct with that, guys?
Yeah, that's correct, Sarah. And we also want to address the question, which I think is, what is the process beyond this initial learning community?
Right. Where we're going forward, right? Where we go next, the next steps, right? Okay. I hope that answered. I forgot who put that question in, but it was a few. I think I saw 2 people.
Yeah, so you guys anyone can chime in.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm happy to. Or
this is Mona. I think one of the main, after you really read and look this, is the relationship. The relationship was one of the reasons. And if we have a smaller group, 16 and 16, the relationship they can build is going to be better than if we have hundreds or a big number. So we are focusing this is just the beginning. We are just starting this relationship. So if 16 and 16 have a really good relationship and understand each other and have a real talk, a deep conversation, then in the future, we could have a bigger number. And that's how we make a smaller group.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Muna. It's like, I think one of the reasons we want to keep it small this time is because we know that it's a growing, living document. And, you know, after this year of, you know, working together in a community of practice, we're really hoping, you know, that there will be, you know, some time over, I guess, the winter to be revising the tool and really, you know, finding ways to sort of improve upon it, make it more accessible, make it more useful for different kinds of funders. And really the goal is to keep growing it and to sort of have this be sort of one of the, I think, hallmark things for what the funders group in collaboration with parents group does, is really try to use this as a way to continue expanding to, you know, other funders, other types of funders, to really keep on impacting the philanthropic practice.
Yeah. Someone asked Mike, what is the process going past this? And I know that we talked about making this a living document, making amendments as we go. We want this relationship to carry on forever. We don't just want it to stop. We want to just keep going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny. So if that answers that, you know, and just as much energy as the Energizer Bunny has, that's how encouraged and enthused we are about this whole process. I see another question. There's so many going, which is so great. Someone asked if we could share the slide deck. I know I saw that somewhere. I'm trying to see who asked, but I think that's we can, and it's for everyone. I think someone else said, can it be shared with all funders? This tool can be shared with all funders also. Yes. Sorry guys, working your way back up. I'm trying to work backwards.
There was a question from Ira, is the tool available for funders to use for their own learning or just with the 16 funders? So for this initial pilot phase, for funders who are interested in testing it, but not necessarily able to join the learning community and make the commitment to these meetings, we're just asking that you do commit to providing us feedback, because again, the goal is to use this as a pilot learning process. It's an iterative living, breathing tool. So you'd be making that commitment to provide us with feedback and not to distribute it very widely, because again, we're going to be doing revisions and making sure that we're making adequate updates based on actual lived practice in implementing it.
I think that's a really great point, and but we are very much interested, Ira, in folks doing that kind of experimentation, because I think to Malia's point in the chat, we really want this to be as user-friendly as possible. You know, the idea is that at some point you wouldn't need a community of practice and a lot of TA to really get something out of it. So yeah, if we could have folks sort of understanding what they can get out of it and feeding that back to us throughout, that would be incredibly helpful to us, I think.
Awesome.
And then there's a question about who do you join, who do you contact? So after this event, we were going to be actually sending out a survey to everybody who registered. So that is one way that you can designate whether or not you're interested either in attending this particular pilot, or if you're interested but not able to commit at this point in time, so that you can be notified if there's other alternative ways for you to connect and utilize the tool and learn with us.
And continue to put your questions in the chat if you have them. We do want to respect everyone's time, so let's just keep it moving and we'll keep monitoring. And even if we don't answer your questions today, someone will absolutely get back to you with concrete answers. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the whole team effort in kind of collecting and answering those questions as well. So I'll pass it off then to Malia, and she can talk a little bit more about next steps.
Great, thank you, Katie. Malia Ramler, Heising Simons Foundation, and a member of the Funders Group Advisory Committee. So excited to have all of you on the phone and interested in this. There's a little bit of this process when we were thinking about the launch of what if you throw a party and nobody comes, and is it really just been the small group who've been thinking about this? So it's really exciting and good to be together with all of you. So now your job is to think about how, if you're participating from a funder's perspective, if you're here representing a philanthropy in some way, to think about how you and your foundation want to be involved in this work over the next year, where it's really being refined and gotten ready for broad distribution in 2022. And so we just heard this idea that there's room for everybody to be involved, but there may not be room for everybody to be involved in the learning community. And Muna and others really talked about why that is, wanting to have a small group that can dig deep. But we also know that in the long run, that's not always going to be available. So it's really valuable to get feedback both ways. Either you joined the learning community or you used it and played with it and are giving us feedback that says, you know, that was hard to understand, or whatever that feedback might be. And the way that you can sort of raise your hand to say, yes, this is the way we want to do it, or not, is the survey that Iris is going to send you as soon as we're off this call. So when you get that, please fill out the survey. And to get to the group, the small group that will be in the learning community, Iris and Katie and the group will be looking at your survey responses, trying to balance who's in that learning community so that the advisory committee that has been obsessing about this for a year doesn't, you know, it's not just those institutions. And it'll be outside of that balance, pretty much first come, first serve. So we're asking you to think about the expectations you heard today, answer that survey, and raise your hand by April 15th if you want to be into the learning community. What will happen after that is the funders group will get back to sort of say, here's, you know, how we're moving to start scheduling the learning community and moving forward, or here's your process for using the tool yourself and providing feedback. So after you fill out that survey, you will stay tuned for next steps. And you know, we really do recognize a couple of things we heard today just to think about as you're making that decision. That the great big goal, I think Iris said it at the beginning, was to connect the dots between race equity and parent voice in our grant making so that we can wield, share, and build power in ways that really serve equity in the long run. And change is hard, and change is a team sport. So thank you for your leadership in leading your teams in that change. This tool is intended to be a way to help us be disciplined and systematic about thinking about what we can do next, not to say you're doing it right and you're doing it wrong. And we really invite you to add the perspective that you bring from wherever you sit to the conversation. And I think with that, I will turn it back to, I don't know if I'm turning it back to Iris and Katie or Rosa and Mike to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Malia. I have noticed that there have been a couple of extra or additional questions that have popped up in the chat. And since we have a couple of minutes, just want to make sure that, you know, those questions have been addressed. I see that Mike responded to Ira's question, and that Iris just responded to the question about a summary of the domains of the self-reflection tool. So in case folks are curious about kind of what you will have access to after this meeting, we will send out in an email a link to that executive summary of the self-reflection tool, as well as a link to the exit survey that Iris shared in the chat, so that it's all kind of in one place. and you can feel free to share with your colleagues if that's of interest to you, and if you think that they would be interested in participating as well. So with that, I will, in a very rare case of ending a meeting slightly early and giving you some minutes back in your day, we will just thank everyone so much for your time, for your thoughtful questions, and your participation today. And just really hope to see you all soon, and are looking forward to partnering with all of you as we continue this journey moving forward. So thank you all so much, and we are so looking forward to working with you as we continue this work.
Thank you.